I'm Chrissie, member here at Oasis Christian Center. I've been coming here several years. Uh, as most of y'all know, my daughter moved to Washington State in 2019, and I've been up there probably 4 times, 5 times since she moved to see her. And in February of this year, my grandson was turning 3. So I was flying up there for a week, and I got on the plane, and like when you're going down the aisles and you're looking at the numbers, they never line up with the seat. Like you're in 17, but then you sit down in 18. So that happened to me. So I was in the wrong row, so I got up and I moved to the row in front of me. And I'm sitting there, and I had the window seat away from the wing. And this lady and man came and sat down, and they had been running through the airport. Like they had a connecting flight, so they were running to get to where we were. So they held the plane for them to get there. And this lady sits down beside me, and my father had a heart attack in 2017. And when you come that close to losing a parent or anyone, they're more precious. So I called my father to tell him that I was on the plane and that I was leaving, and I always call my daddy. He's not dad, he's daddy. So I'm on there, and I'm like, the flight's fixing to take off, Daddy, and I love you, and I'll let you know as soon as I land in Washington. So the lady's sitting beside me, and she goes, "Is that your dad?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she was like, and she started crying, and she said, "I lost my father 3 years ago." She said, "And it's something that you never get over." And so I just start talking to this lady for 5.5 hours on a flight to Washington State. But I never knew her name. I never told her my name. I never asked her name, nor her husband's name. So we talked, and it was like the best 5.5 hour flight I think I've ever had. And so we get off the plane, and I'm like, it was so nice to meet you. She was just so wonderful. And I found out that she lived like where my daughter lived. So she was like probably 15 minutes from where my daughter lived now when she moved. So we're there the whole week, and like I'm there, and I'm telling my daughter every day I mentioned this lady on the plane and the way she was, and our interaction. It was like I had known her forever, but had just met her on a plane to Washington. So I was leaving. I was only there for a week. So the day before my flight was to take off, we were like running around doing shopping, like getting souvenirs, and I'd like to bring my father weird stuff to try from different places. So we was doing all this stuff, and then we went into Costco's. Like that was our last thing before we left, and we was going back to her house. And it was like full mask, so you couldn't see anyone from like the nose up down. You didn't know what they looked like. So the whole flight there, I saw this, only her eyes, and she had a baseball hat on. So I didn't really. She just had some brown eyes. That's all I could tell you. She had brown eyes. And so we get into the store, and we're walking in. My daughter shows them her ID card, and we probably got 20 feet into Costco's, and somebody taps me on my shoulder. And I turned around, and it was the lady from the plane. And she said, "You're not going to believe this." She said, "But I was crying this morning to my husband and asking him, because she had been praying to God to see me before I left." And a state the size of Washington State, which is massive, God put me in a Costco so that I could see that lady. We stood there and talked for about 30 minutes, easy 30 minutes. She met my daughter, she met my grandchildren. She told my daughter that she would come and get her and take her to her church, and that she would, try to help my daughter find a church to take my grandson, because Joel is so curious about God. He's 5, and he's so curious. Every night before he goes to sleep, He prays. He prays for me, his family, his daddy, all the other police officers that are around them, the people that my son-in-law comes in contact with. So he's very curious about God. And this lady loves God so much. And he brought her to me on a plane to give to my daughter so that she could have a connection. And this lady sent me a friend's request standing in Costco. She sent my daughter a friend's request. She comments on every single post that my daughter puts on Facebook about how wonderful and, you know, just, and it was such a connection. And, you know, so this was about divine connections, and you never realize the impact that you can have on a person. And it doesn't always have to be about a trauma. It was a lady on a plane that was still grieving her father's passing. And me being able to call my father and tell him that I loved him was like her being able to tell her own father that she loved him again. And that's how she took it. She took it as like almost like an extension from me to him, so that she could hear those words being spoken to her father, to my father, for her father. And it was so powerful. And honestly, if it hadn't been for the pastors like constantly, you know, teaching us about divine connections and, you know, like where God is working and he's there, and it's, you don't even realize what it is. You don't know that she needed me as much as I needed her. I needed her for my daughter. She needed me for my father. But it was such a beautiful thing, and like it was wonderful. And then to have seen her again, to be able to like truly like hug her neck and tell her what a blessing it was to meet her was the most wonderful thing. And I think it is something that I will remember for the rest of my life. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I feel like if we can just, you know, like open our eyes to recognize where